The sun was setting over the Miami skyline, casting a golden hue over the water as our yacht glided across the waves. I stood on the deck, my arm wrapped around Emma's waist, thinking this was the perfect way to bring us closer. I had planned this trip for months, an exclusive yacht tour with friends, a chance to reconnect with my wife, Emma, and spend time with Benjamin Mason, my old friend from law school. "This is beautiful, Jason," Emma said, her eyes scanning the horizon. I smiled. "It is. Thought we could use a bit of luxury." Emma nodded, but her attention seemed elsewhere, her eyes flickering across the deck to where Benjamin stood, laughing with another couple. At the time, I shrugged it off. I trusted Emma. I trusted Ben. After all, why wouldn't I? But over the next few days, something started to feel off. It was subtle at first, the way Emma would disappear for hours, claiming she was just taking some time alone to enjoy the sea breeze. Benjamin seemed to be wherever she was, offering her drinks, making jokes I wasn't a part of. It was a shift like a cloud slowly darkening the sky before the storm hit. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and I had returned to our yacht after a long dinner with some of the other guests. Emma hadn't come with me. She said she had a headache and wanted to stay behind. As I climbed aboard, the yacht was eerily quiet. The only sound was the gentle rocking of the water against the hull. I stepped down the narrow passageway toward our cabin when I heard a faint sound from one of the nearby rooms, Benjamin's room. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I wasn't prepared for the sight that awaited me. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see them together. Emma was wrapped in Benjamin's arms, their bodies pressed close in the dim light of his cabin. It hit me like a punch to the gut, the kind you don't recover from. I closed the door as quietly as I could, my head spinning. I didn't confront them, not yet. I needed time to think and plan. I wasn't the kind of man who'd throw a punch and let that be the end of it. No, I had something much bigger in mind. That night, I lay in bed next to Emma, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully as if nothing had happened. Rage boiled inside me, but I kept it under control. I was a lawyer. I knew how to play the long game. If they thought they could betray me and walk away unscathed, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I woke with a plan. The morning after I saw them together, everything felt surreal. I moved through the motions, shaving, dressing, pouring myself coffee, while my mind raced, processing what I had witnessed. Emma acted as though nothing was wrong, smiling at me over her cup of tea as if the night before had never happened. "Sleep well?" she asked, her voice casual, her smile easy. I forced a smile back. Like a baby. I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. I needed time to set the stage, to lay the groundwork for what would come next. I wasn't just going to explode in a fit of rage. That would be too easy for them. No, I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal, to experience the same sense of helplessness I had felt standing outside that cabin door. Later that day, we docked in Miami for a brief stop before heading back out to sea. I used the opportunity to put my plan into motion. First, I called a few contacts I'd worked with over the years, people who specialized in more discreet matters. As a successful attorney, I had built a network of people who could make things happen without asking too many questions. It wasn't hard to get the wheels turning. The plan was simple, really. I'd make them believe everything was falling apart. Benjamin had always envied my success, my thriving legal career, my investments, the luxury life Emma and I lived. He might have had charm and wit, but he'd never been able to match me when it came to building something lasting. Now, I'd make him think I had lost everything. When we returned to the yacht that evening, I began planting the first seeds. I made a point of leaving a few financial reports on the dining table. Reports I had fabricated to look like my businesses were in trouble. A few numbers were tweaked here and there, and projections skewed to show potential bankruptcy. Emma noticed the papers when she passed by. "What's this?" she asked, picking up one of the folders. "Just some work stuff," I said casually, barely looking up from my laptop. "Nothing major." I could see the curiosity spark in her eyes. Emma had always enjoyed the financial perks of our marriage, the stability I provided. The idea of losing it all? I knew it would terrify her. And the best part? She wouldn't come to me directly. She'd go to Benjamin, just like she had been going to him for everything else. Over the next few days, I continued to drop hints, small breadcrumbs leading them both down a path of suspicion and anxiety. I pretended to take phone calls, lowering my voice whenever Emma or Benjamin walked by, acting as though I was trying to hide something. One evening, Emma cornered me while we were alone on the deck. "Jason," she said, her voice hesitant. "Is everything okay? You've seemed off lately." I looked at her, forcing myself to meet her eyes without letting the anger seep through. "It's just work. Things are a little tight right now." "Tight? How tight?" I shrugged as if trying to downplay it. "It's nothing I can't handle." Her face tightened, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. The Emma I knew didn't handle uncertainty well. She liked things clean, controlled, and safe. I could practically see her imagining a life without the comfort she'd grown used to. By the end of the week, the tension between us had grown thick, but it wasn't the kind of tension that came from guilt or confrontation. It is the kind that comes when people hold secrets. I pretended not to notice the hushed conversations between Emma and Benjamin, the way their eyes would meet and quickly dart away whenever I walked into a room. They thought they were in control. They thought they were hiding something from me. But in reality, they were playing right into my hands. I spent the next few days finalizing my plan. I had my contacts place more fake documents around the yacht, fake foreclosure notices, fake legal threats. I even had a friend draft a phony letter from the bank, warning of an impending asset freeze. The goal was to make them believe I was on the brink of financial ruin. And I could see it working. One afternoon, I overheard them talking when they thought I wasn't around. I was sitting in the lounge, out of sight but close enough to hear every word. "I don't know, Ben," Emma said, her voice tight with worry. "I think Jason's hiding something from me. He's been acting so strange lately." Benjamin chuckled, the sound grating in my ears. "You're overthinking it. He's probably just stressed about work. You know how Jason is, always trying to handle everything on his own." Emma didn't sound convinced. "What if it's worse than that? What if he's really in trouble?" For a moment, there was silence, and then Benjamin's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Then maybe we need to start thinking about what comes next, Em." I clenched my fists, rage bubbling just beneath the surface. They thought they could plan their future without me. They thought they could brush me aside and move on with their lives. But they had no idea what was coming. This was only the beginning. The tension on the yacht was palpable. Emma and Benjamin had no idea I was watching their every move, every whispered conversation. They thought I was oblivious, distracted by my financial ruin. But the more anxious they became, the more satisfaction I felt. They were sinking into the web I had carefully spun, and soon, it would tighten around them. I needed the perfect moment to set the final piece of my plan in motion. One evening, as we anchored just off the coast of Key Biscayne, I saw my opportunity. We were having dinner on the upper deck, just the three of us, the way it used to be back in the old days when we were all friends. Benjamin kept the conversation light, telling stories of his latest business ventures, trying to mask his growing unease. Emma, meanwhile, was quiet. I could tell the stress of the past few days was getting to her. The fake financial papers, the ominous letters from the bank, all of it was weighing her down. She wasn't used to uncertainty. When dessert was served, I decided it was time. "I've been thinking," I said, leaning back in my chair. "About the future." Emma glanced at me, her expression guarded. Benjamin, on the other hand, raised an eyebrow, pretending to be interested. "Oh?" Benjamin asked. "And what's the plan, Jason? You always seem to have one." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah, I do. You know, things haven't been great for me financially lately. I'm sure you've both noticed." Emma shifted in her seat, staring down at her plate. Benjamin shot her a quick look before turning back to me. "Yeah, you've seemed preoccupied," he said carefully. "Well, I think I've come up with a solution," I continued, watching their reactions closely. "I've decided to sell the yacht." Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? Jason, you love this yacht." I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "I do, but it's an asset I can't afford to hold onto right now. Things are tough, and I need to make some sacrifices." Benjamin leaned forward slightly, trying to hide his eagerness. "And when are you planning to sell?" "I've already started the process," I said smoothly. "In fact, the paperwork should be finalized by the end of the week. We'll be docking in Miami for the last time soon, and then, well, everything changes." Emma looked like she was about to protest, but stopped herself. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her wanted to argue, to fight for what we had, but another part of her, the part that had already betrayed me with Benjamin, was calculating her next move. That's sudden, Emma finally said, her voice strained. Life moves fast, I replied, pushing my plate aside. Sometimes, you just have to adapt. There was a long silence after that. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on us, the unspoken tension between us all. Emma and Benjamin were processing what I had just told them, trying to figure out how to respond. They were scrambling, unsure of how this fit into whatever plans they had made together. The next morning, I watched from the corner of my eye as they huddled together on the lower deck, speaking in hushed tones. They thought I couldn't hear them, but the wind carried fragments of their conversation to where I stood. He's selling everything, Emma whispered, her voice shaky. What if he really loses everything, Ben? What happens to us? Benjamin tried to calm her down. We need to stay calm, Em. We can't let him know we're worried. Just stick to the plan. We'll figure something out once we're back on shore. Stick to the plan? I almost laughed at the irony. They thought they had a plan, some future together that didn't include me. They didn't realize I had been pulling the strings the whole time. Later that afternoon, I left the yacht to make a few last-minute arrangements. I returned with a stack of fresh documents, more fake financial papers, just enough to push them over the edge. As I walked into the cabin, I made sure to leave them on the desk, just within view. Then I waited. It didn't take long. Less than an hour later, Emma wandered into the cabin, pretending to be looking for something. Her eyes immediately locked onto the papers, and I watched from the shadows as she flipped through them. Her face growing pale as she read. She rushed out of the cabin, almost bumping into Benjamin as he came down the stairs. You need to see this, she whispered urgently, dragging him inside. I watched from a distance as they pored over the documents, their expressions going from shock to disbelief. This is bad, Benjamin muttered, pacing back and forth. He's really about to lose everything. Emma looked like she was on the verge of panic. What do? We can't just sit here and watch it all fall apart. Benjamin grabbed her by the shoulders, trying to steady her. We wait. We can't make any rash decisions. Let's just see how this plays out. I watched them for a moment longer before stepping out from the shadows. Everything all right? I asked, pretending not to notice the tension between them. They both jumped, clearly startled by my sudden appearance. Yeah, Benjamin said quickly, too quickly. Everything's fine. Good, I said with a smile, my voice calm. Because tomorrow, I'm calling a meeting. There's something I think we all need to discuss. Emma and Benjamin exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. They had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, the trap would close. The morning of the meeting, I woke up early. I stood on the deck, staring at the calm ocean, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. Today was the day. Emma and Benjamin thought they had everything figured out. They had whispered behind my back, made plans, and convinced themselves that I was clueless. But today, all of that would come crashing down. By the time Emma and Benjamin emerged from their cabins, I had already set the stage. I had the fake bank documents spread across the dining table, foreclosure notices, asset freezes, everything I knew would send them into a panic. I could see the strain in Emma's face as she sat down, trying to act normal, but her eyes kept darting to the papers. Benjamin, ever the smooth talker, looked calm on the surface, but I could see the cracks forming. Jason, what's this meeting about? Emma asked, forcing a smile. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee as if the world wasn't about to implode around them. I think it's time we talked about the future. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the documents. Yeah, you've mentioned that. Is this about the yacht sale? Not just the yacht, I said, my voice calm and measured. It's about everything. My business, our lifestyle, the whole thing. It's all falling apart. Emma's face paled. You mean, we're really losing everything? I nodded, watching the panic set in. Yes, Emma, everything. There was a long silence as the weight of my words sunk in. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. Emma worrying about her future. Benjamin trying to figure out his next move. They were trapped, and they knew it. I've been trying to fix things, I continued, keeping my voice steady. But it's too late. The debts are too high. The banks are closing in. We're going to lose the yacht. The house. Everything we've built. Emma's hand trembled as she reached for the papers. Jason, why didn't you tell me sooner? We could have done something. I shrugged, playing the part of the defeated husband. I didn't want to burden you. I thought I could handle it on my own. Benjamin cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. Look, Jason, I know this is tough, but maybe there's still a way out. I could help, financially. I had to stop myself from laughing. Of course, Benjamin wanted to step in as the savior, the man with the solution. He probably thought this was his chance to swoop in, rescue Emma, and take my place. But that wasn't going to happen. That's generous of you, Ben, I said, keeping my expression neutral. But I don't think even you can save us from this. Emma looked at Benjamin, her eyes wide with desperation. Maybe he's right, Ben. Maybe we need to start thinking about what comes next. Benjamin's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, I saw his mask slip. He wasn't as calm as he wanted me to think. They were both scrambling, trying to hold on to whatever security they thought they had left. I stood up slowly, gathering the papers into a neat pile. I think we're done here. Emma blinked, confused. What do you mean? What are we supposed to do now? I looked at them both, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing the moment of truth was finally here. You do nothing. This was never about the money. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock, and I could see the realization dawning on them. This was about you, I said, my voice hardening. Both of you. Your lies. Your betrayal. For a split second, the world stood still. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief, and Benjamin's face drained of color. They weren't prepared for this. They had no idea what was coming. You thought I didn't know? I asked, stepping closer to them. You thought you could sneak around behind my back, make your little plans, and I'd be none the wiser? Jason. Wait, Benjamin started, but I cut him off. No, I said sharply. You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify what you've done. I've known about the two of you for weeks. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jason, I don't want to hear it, I snapped. I've been watching you, both of you, thinking you could outsmart me. But the truth is, I've been one step ahead of you this entire time. Benjamin took a step toward me, his voice low. Jason, let's talk about this like men. Like men? I laughed, cutting him off again. You want to talk about being a man? A real man doesn't betray his friend. A real man doesn't sneak around with another man's wife. You're no man, Ben. You're a coward. The color drained from his face, and for the first time, Benjamin looked truly scared. Emma was trembling, tears welling in her eyes. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. You both disgust me, I continued, my voice cold. But you know what? I'm not angry anymore. I've moved past that. Now, I'm just done. With that, I tossed the papers on the table, turning to walk away. I didn't care what they had to say. Their words meant nothing to me now. As I headed toward the door, I stopped and turned back to them one last time. Oh, and one more thing, I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. Everything you've seen, everything you've read? The bankruptcy, the foreclosure. All of it was fake. I'm not losing anything. Their eyes widened in disbelief. I'm not the one who's lost, I said, stepping out onto the deck. You are. I left them standing in stunned silence, their betrayal now laid bare, their futures unraveling before their eyes. But I wasn't finished yet. Their humiliation was just beginning. The next morning, I executed the final phase of my plan. I had been preparing for this moment long before I uncovered their affair. I had copies of their text messages, photos, and even video recordings of their stolen moments on the yacht. I didn't need them to confess. I already had all the evidence I needed. I spent the early hours of the morning uploading everything into a private folder, setting it to go live at noon. I made sure that everyone in our social circle, our friends, colleagues, even their families, would have access to it. It wasn't enough to expose them to me. I wanted the world to see what kind of people they really were. At exactly 12 o'clock, I pressed the button. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Messages poured in, people expressing shock and disbelief, some even reaching out to offer their support. But I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was the knowledge that Emma and Benjamin's secret was no longer theirs to keep. I walked onto the deck, breathing in the salty air as the waves gently rocked the yacht. Emma and Benjamin hadn't left their cabin since yesterday. I imagined them holed up together, frantically trying to figure out how to salvage their shattered lives. But there was no salvaging this. Not anymore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the water, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The weight of their betrayal was gone, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing I had taken control of my life again. They thought they could manipulate me, steal from me, and leave me broken. But I wasn't broken. I was free, and they were finished. The fallout was swift. By the time the sun set over Miami the next day, Emma and Benjamin's reputations were in ruins. The videos, the messages, the proof of their affair. All of it spread like wildfire across our social circle. There was no hiding anymore, no going back. They had been exposed, and the damage was irreversible. I stood on the deck of the yacht, watching the coastline of Miami fade in the distance as we sailed away from the city. The boat was quiet, eerily so, as Emma and Benjamin remained holed up in their cabins, likely still trying to process the wreckage of their lives. They hadn't spoken to me since the meeting. There was nothing left to say. I had received a few calls throughout the day, old friends, coworkers, people curious to know what had happened. Most of them were shocked, and more than a few expressed their support for me, but I didn't care about their sympathy. The truth was, I didn't need it. This wasn't about getting people on my side. It wasn't about playing the victim. This was about setting the record straight. I wanted Emma and Benjamin to understand the full weight of their betrayal, and now the whole world knew what kind of people they truly were. Around midday, Emma finally emerged from her cabin. She looked pale and exhausted, like she hadn't slept all night. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red, but she still carried that air of grace that had once drawn me to her. The same air that had now become a mask, one I had learned to see through. "Jason," she said softly, her voice fragile. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the railing, looking out over the water. "Talk about what, Emma?" "There's nothing left to say." She stepped closer, the faint smell of her perfume catching in the breeze. "I know you're angry. I know I hurt you. But we can't just end things like this. We were together for years. Doesn't that mean something?" I turned to look at her, my face expressionless. "What it meant, Emma, ended the moment you betrayed me." She flinched like the words had physically hurt her. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you. And yet, you did," I said, my voice cold. "Over and over again. Every time you lied to me, every time you snuck around with Benjamin, you made a choice. Don't pretend you didn't know what you were doing." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. This was a woman who had willingly destroyed the life we had built together, and now she wanted me to feel sorry for her. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I know I did. But we can fix this, Jason. We can." "There's nothing to fix," I interrupted, cutting her off. "I've already made my decision. You're not a part of my future anymore." She stared at me for a long moment, the tears spilling over as she finally realized there was no going back. "So that's it? After everything we've been through, you're just done with me?" "I didn't end this, Emma," I said, turning away from her. "You did." I could hear her soft sobs behind me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I had, maybe a small part of me would have felt something: pity, guilt, regret. But I didn't want to feel any of those things. Not anymore. Emma stayed there for a few more moments, crying quietly before she finally walked away, disappearing back into the cabin. I let out a long breath, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was over. The ties that had once bound us were severed, and for the first time in years, I felt free. If Emma's plea had been emotional, Benjamin's approach was the complete opposite. That night, after the sun had set and the moonlit ocean stretched out before us, Benjamin finally made his move. I was sitting in the lounge, sipping a glass of whiskey, when he walked in, his footsteps heavy with determination. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Jason," he said, his voice low and serious. "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the seat across from me. "By all means, Ben. Let's talk." He sat down, his posture stiff, his eyes narrowed as if he was preparing for a fight. "You've made your point. I get it. You're angry. But this is going too far." "Too far?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, amused by his audacity. "You think exposing the truth is going too far? You've humiliated us," Benjamin snapped, his fists clenched on the table. "Publicly. You've ruined our lives." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, letting his words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "You ruined your own lives, Ben. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." His jaw tightened, and I could see the anger boiling just beneath the surface. "We all make mistakes. You don't get to play God just because we screwed up. You've taken this to a whole new level." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "You think this is a game? Do you think what you did was just some mistake, something we can sweep under the rug? You betrayed me, Ben. You weren't just some friend who messed up, you were my brother." He flinched at the word, but I kept going, my voice steady and cold. "You don't get to walk away from this like it's nothing. You don't get to play the victim here. For a moment, Benjamin didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the table, his expression dark. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a long breath and spoke, his voice quieter. I never meant for it to go this far. It started, innocently. We were just talking. Then, one thing led to another. I didn't think. Stop, I said sharply, cutting him off. Don't insult me with that crap. You thought about every step. You knew exactly what you were doing. Benjamin fell silent, his face a mask of regret and frustration. He knew I was right. He had known from the moment he first made a move on Emma that this would eventually come crashing down. I'll tell you what, I said after a long pause. I won't destroy you completely. You'll still have your business, your career. You can pick up the pieces of your life and move on. But you'll never be welcome in mine again. Benjamin looked up at me, a mixture of relief and resentment in his eyes. He had expected worse, but he also knew that this was a permanent fracture. Our friendship, our bond, everything we had built over the years, was gone. He stood up, his face tight with anger, but he didn't say another word. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the deck as he disappeared into the night. I sat there for a long time, the weight of the day pressing down on me. The revenge was complete. They were humiliated, exposed, and broken. But as the waves gently rocked the yacht, I realized something I hadn't anticipated. The anger was gone, and in its place, there was nothing but emptiness. The yacht was still. The night enveloped everything in a heavy, suffocating silence. I stood alone on the deck, staring out at the vast ocean, the sound of the waves the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I had done it. My revenge was complete. Emma and Benjamin were destroyed, left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. But as I stood there, watching the stars reflect off the dark water, a strange feeling began to settle in my chest. Emptiness. I had expected to feel triumph, satisfaction even. But there was none of that. The victory I had envisioned felt hollow, like a meal that looked appetizing but left me hungry once I devoured it. Emma and Benjamin's betrayal had consumed me for weeks. It was all I could think about, the planning, the execution, the final reveal. I had dedicated every waking moment to exposing them, to making sure they paid for what they did to me. But now that it was over, now that they were finally facing the consequences of their actions, I was left with nothing. I walked to the edge of the deck, gripping the railing tightly as I looked down at the churning waves below. The cold wind stung my face, but it couldn't break through the numbness I felt inside. Was this really what I wanted? To be rid of them? To be left standing alone with no one beside me? I had told myself that revenge was the only way to heal, to move on. But now that it was done, I wasn't sure what came next. I had no plans, no future beyond this moment. Everything felt uncertain, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss with no idea what lay at the bottom. The sound of footsteps behind me pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Emma. Her presence was unmistakable, a mix of tension and regret that hung in the air between us like a thick fog. Jason, she said softly, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I didn't respond at first. I wasn't sure I had anything left to say. But after a long moment, I nodded and turned to face her. She looked worse than she had earlier, her eyes puffy from crying, her face pale and drawn. But even in her broken state, there was still something in her eyes, a flicker of the woman I had once loved. What do you want to talk about? I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated as if searching for the right words. I know there's nothing I can say to fix this. I know I've lost you. But I need you to understand that I never meant for things to get this bad. I made a terrible mistake, and I've been living with that guilt ever since. I stared at her, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sorrow, and confusion. You made a mistake? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. You think what you did was just a mistake? Emma, you didn't trip and fall into Benjamin's arms. You chose this. You lied to me, over and over again. You made a decision every single day to betray me. Don't stand here and tell me it was just a mistake. Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she wiped them away furiously. I know I made those choices. But, Jason, it was never about hurting you. It wasn't even about Benjamin. I was lost. I felt trapped like I wasn't myself anymore, and I didn't know how to get out. Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I could almost understand what she was saying. I had been so focused on my own pain, my own sense of betrayal. That I hadn't stopped to consider what she had been going through. But that didn't change anything. It didn't excuse what she had done. "I don't care why you did it, Emma," I said finally, my voice cold. "It doesn't matter. You broke us. And now we're nothing." She let out a choked sob, her whole body trembling. "I know. And I'll never forgive myself for that." I looked away, unable to face her anymore. The ocean seemed more comforting than the tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to feel sorry for her. I didn't want to feel anything at all. "I think you should go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She stood there for a few more moments as if hoping I'd change my mind, but I didn't. Eventually, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the sound of the waves once again. Days passed after that conversation with Emma, but it all felt like a blur. The yacht tour ended in Miami, but I didn't go straight home. Instead, I checked into a hotel, needing time and space to think about everything that had happened. The phone calls and messages continued to flood in, friends wanting to check on me, business contacts curious about the drama, but I ignored them all. I needed silence. I needed to be alone. It wasn't until the third day in the hotel that I received a call I couldn't ignore. It was from a law firm in New York, a place I had done business with before. They wanted to meet with me, to discuss a partnership on a major case that could change everything for my career. Normally, I would have jumped at the opportunity. But after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to be a part of that world anymore. Still, I knew I couldn't hide forever. I flew to New York the next day, not knowing what to expect. The city was as overwhelming as ever, the noise, the crowds, the constant rush of people and cars. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of something inside me. Maybe it was the possibility of a fresh start, or maybe it was just the distraction I needed. Either way, I was ready for whatever came next. The meeting with the law firm went better than I expected. They were offering me a partnership in a high-profile class action lawsuit, something that would catapult my name even higher in the legal world. It was everything I had worked for: prestige, recognition, success. But as I sat there, listening to them talk about the potential money and fame that would come with the case, I found myself wondering if that was what I really wanted anymore. I had spent so much of my life chasing success, building a reputation, creating a life that looked perfect from the outside. But now, after everything that had happened with Emma and Benjamin, I wasn't sure if that life mattered to me anymore. The things I had once valued felt empty, just like the revenge I had so carefully planned. That night, after the meeting, I went to a bar in Manhattan, nursing a drink as I watched the city move around me. People were laughing, talking, and living their lives like nothing was wrong. And for the first time, I realized that maybe there was more to life than just success and power. Maybe it was time for me to figure out who I was without the mask of the high-powered attorney, the husband, the friend. Maybe it was time for a new beginning. A real one. As I sat there, staring at the drink in my hand, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay in New York. I wasn't going to chase the same old dreams anymore. I needed something different, something real. I needed to find out who I was without all the noise. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt a glimmer of hope. It had been weeks since I'd walked away from the meeting in New York, and since then, life had taken a completely unexpected turn. Instead of diving headfirst into another high-stakes case, I chose to disappear for a while. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, just packed a small suitcase, booked a one-way ticket to a quiet town in North Carolina, and left Miami behind. I rented a modest cottage by the water, far from the buzz of the city. There were no more yacht parties, no high-profile legal meetings, and no reminders of my old life. It was just me, the sound of the waves, and the occasional seagull squawking in the distance. For the first few days, it felt strange. I had always been so connected to the fast pace of life, constantly checking my phone and my email, always planning my next move. But now, in this quiet town, there was none of that. And slowly, I began to unwind, letting the tension that had gripped me for so long melt away. The locals didn't know who I was, and I liked it that way. They just saw me as another traveler passing through, and that anonymity gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I started spending my days reading books that had nothing to do with law or business. I took long walks along the beach, letting my mind drift. For the first time, I didn't have a plan, and it was liberating. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the ocean. The colors were spectacular, shades of orange, pink, and purple blending together in a way that almost seemed unreal. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of Miami, where everything always felt rushed. Here, time moved slowly, and that slowness gave me room to breathe. As the sky darkened, I thought back to everything that had happened. The betrayal, the revenge, the emptiness that had followed. In a way, it felt like a different lifetime, like I was thinking about someone else's story. The pain was still there, but it had dulled, softened by the distance and the quiet. I wasn't the same person who had stormed onto that yacht in Miami, hell-bent on destroying the lives of Emma and Benjamin. That man was gone, along with the anger that had consumed him. What remained was something else, someone I was still getting to know. The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from my thoughts. It was the first time I had heard it ring in days. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something made me pick it up. It was a message from Emma. "I need to talk to you. Please." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the delete button. A part of me wanted to erase the message, to cut her out of my life for good. But another part of me, the part that had grown quieter and more thoughtful over the past few weeks, wanted to hear her out. With a deep breath, I typed a reply. Okay. A week later, I found myself back in Miami. I hadn't expected to return so soon, but the message from Emma had stirred something inside me that I couldn't ignore. I needed closure. We both did. We met at a small cafe near the beach, a far cry from the glamorous places we used to frequent. Emma looked different, older, worn out, like the weight of everything that had happened had finally caught up to her. Her once perfectly styled hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her makeup was minimal. For the first time in a long time, she looked real. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly, her eyes avoiding mine as she stirred her coffee. I nodded but didn't say anything. I wasn't here for small talk. Emma took a deep breath, finally looking up at me. "I've thought a lot about what happened, about what I did to you, to us. And I know that no amount of apologies will ever make up for the pain I caused." I watched her carefully, unsure where this was going. "I was selfish," she continued. "I got caught up in my own insecurities, my own issues, and I didn't think about what it would do to you. Or maybe I did, but I didn't care. I was so lost in my own world that I forgot what we had." I could hear the regret in her voice, but it didn't stir the emotions it once would have. I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore, just a sense of finality. "I've been trying to figure out why I did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why I threw everything away. And I realized that it wasn't just about Benjamin. It wasn't even about you. It was about me. I was scared of losing myself, and instead of facing that, I made the worst decision of my life." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. There was a time when hearing her say those things would have torn me apart, but now, all I felt was clarity. "I didn't come here to make you feel sorry for me," she added quickly. "I just needed you to know that I understand what I did. I understand why you hate me." "I don't hate you, Emma," I said, surprising myself with how true the words felt. "I thought I did. I wanted to for a long time. But I don't. I'm just done." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, accepting what I had said. "I know. And I deserve that." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything we hadn't said over the past few months hanging between us. It was strange, sitting there with the person I had once shared my life with, knowing that we would never be those people again. "I'm leaving Miami," she said suddenly. "I need to start over somewhere new. Get away from all the memories." I nodded. "That's probably a good idea." She smiled sadly, wiping away a stray tear. I hope you find peace, Jason. I really do." "Same to you," I replied, meaning it. With that, she stood up, leaving a few bills on the table to cover the coffee. I watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowds of Miami. And just like that, the chapter of my life with Emma was closed. As I sat there, finishing my coffee, I felt a strange sense of relief. The conversation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. We had both made mistakes and now we were both free to move on. I stood up and walked out of the cafe, the warm Miami breeze hitting my face as I stepped onto the street. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel weighed down by the past. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready for whatever came next. And that was enough. It had been 2 months since my final conversation with Emma. Life had a strange way of moving forward, whether or not you were ready to keep up. After she left Miami, I returned to my quiet cottage in North Carolina, continuing the process of rediscovering myself. The world around me had become simpler, less complicated. The pain of the past was still there, but it felt more like a dull ache now. One that reminded me of what I had learned rather than what I had lost. One morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, my phone buzzed with a familiar name. Benjamin. I hadn't heard from him since the day everything blew up on the yacht. After exposing their affair and faking my bankruptcy, I had cut all ties with him. He was as much a part of my past as Emma was, and I had no intention of reopening old wounds. But something made me answer this time. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than I remembered. "Jason," he began, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from." He wasn't wrong, but I needed to call. I needed to apologize. I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, but another part, the part that had softened with time, was willing to hear him out. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent every day since that yacht tour thinking about what I did. About how I betrayed you, not just as a friend, but as a person. I'm not proud of who I was back then. I was selfish. I let my own desires destroy everything." There was a pause, and I could hear him struggling to find the right words. "I lost Emma. I lost you. And in the process, I lost myself too." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the ocean as he spoke. It was strange, hearing him sound so broken, so regretful. This was the man who had once been my closest friend, the man I trusted with everything, and he had thrown it all away for something so fleeting. "I don't expect anything from you, Jason," Benjamin said, his voice quieter now. "But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly. I hope one day you can move past what I did." I didn't respond right away. My mind drifted back to the moments on the yacht, the anger, the betrayal, the devastation. But I have come so far since then. I had found a way to let go, to move forward. And holding on to that hatred now, it just didn't feel right anymore. "I don't know if I'll ever completely forgive you, Ben," I said finally, my voice calm. "But I'm not angry anymore. I've moved on, and I think you should too." The line was quiet for a few moments before he spoke again, his voice almost sounding relieved. "Thank you, Jason. That means more than you know." We didn't talk much longer after that. There wasn't much left to say. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. In some ways, Benjamin's apology was the final piece of the puzzle, the last chapter in a story I had been trying to close for months. I stood up and walked down to the beach, the sand warm beneath my feet as the waves rolled gently onto the shore. The sky was a bright, cloudless blue, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The old me, the Jason who had lived for success, for power, for revenge, was gone. In his place was someone else, someone who was still figuring out what life meant without all of the noise and chaos. I had no idea where I was headed, and for the first time, that didn't scare me. I was free, unburdened by the past, and ready for whatever came next. As I stood there, staring out at the horizon, I realized something. Sometimes, the most important battles aren't the ones we fight against others, they're the ones we fight within ourselves. And for the first time, I felt like I had won. 2 more months passed, and with them came a sense of quiet satisfaction. My life in North Carolina had grown into something steady, something fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated. Gone were the days of high-pressure legal battles and cutthroat negotiations. Instead, I found solace in the simplicity of my routine: morning walks along the beach, afternoons spent reading or exploring the nearby town, and the occasional chat with a few of the locals who had become familiar faces. One of those faces was Claire. I had met her at the local market on a particularly sunny afternoon. She owned a small art shop in town, selling paintings and sculptures from local artists. We struck up a conversation over a basket of fresh peaches, and before I knew it, we were sharing coffee at a nearby cafe. Claire was nothing like the people I had known in Miami. She was warm and open, with an easygoing energy that made me feel comfortable in a way I hadn't felt in years. We talked about everything: our lives, our pasts, our hopes for the future. It was refreshing to be able to speak with someone who didn't know the old Jason Hall, the man driven by ambition and status. We started seeing more of each other, but there was no rush, no pressure. It felt natural, like the universe had brought her into my life at exactly the right time. We took long walks on the beach, shared dinners in quiet restaurants, and spent lazy afternoons in her shop, surrounded by the beautiful art she curated. One evening, after we had spent the day hiking in the nearby mountains, we sat on her porch, sipping wine as the sun set over the horizon. Claire looked at me with those bright blue eyes of hers, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You're different, you know," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "From when I first met you. You were quieter then, like you had something heavy weighing on your mind. But now," she trailed off, taking a sip of her wine before continuing. "Now you seem lighter, more at peace." I hadn't realized how much I had changed, but hearing her say it made me pause. She was right. The anger, the bitterness, the need for control, all of it had faded. In its place was something new, something I was still learning to embrace. "Maybe it's because, for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I have to prove anything to anyone," I said, leaning back in my chair. I spent so many years chasing success, chasing this idea of who I thought I should be. But now, I just want to live. Claire smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "That sounds like a good plan." As we sat there, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange, I realized that I had found something I hadn't known I was looking for. It wasn't just peace, it was a sense of belonging, of being content with where I was and who I had become. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from anything. I wasn't chasing after something that didn't matter. I was simply here, and that was enough. As fall settled in, the small town I had come to call home transformed. The leaves turned golden and crimson, and a crisp chill filled the air. Life had taken on a quiet rhythm, and with each passing day, I felt more grounded and more at ease with the direction my life had taken. Claire and I grew closer. Our connection deepened in ways that felt both surprising and natural. She was the opposite of the life I had known with Emma. With Claire, there were no pretenses, no games, no underlying tensions. Just honesty, kindness, and a shared understanding that we were two people who had found each other at the right time. One Saturday morning, as we walked through a nearby park, the leaves crunching under our feet, Claire brought up something I hadn't expected. "Have you thought about going back to work?" she asked, glancing up at me. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't given much thought to returning to law or anything like it. My life had become so far removed from the high-stress environment I used to thrive that I couldn't imagine stepping back into that world. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Part of me feels like I've left that life behind for good. But another part, I guess I do miss the challenge sometimes." Claire nodded, understanding in her expression. "I get that. You're good at what you do, Jason. I can see that, but you don't have to go back to the same way of doing things. Maybe there's another way to use your skills, something that fits the life you want now." Her words lingered with me long after our walk. That night, as I sat on my porch looking out at the stars, I thought about what she had said. The idea of returning to law had never seemed appealing until now. But Claire was right. I didn't have to go back to the person I used to be. Maybe there was a way to combine the things I had learned with the peace I had found. Over the next few days, I began to toy with the idea of starting a small legal practice in the town. Nothing big, nothing high stakes, just something that allowed me to help people without the pressure of my old life. I had spent so many years fighting for people in courtrooms, but maybe now it was time to do something different. Something quieter, more personal. I mentioned the idea to Claire one evening, and her eyes lit up with excitement. "I think that's a great idea," she said, her enthusiasm contagious. "You've got so much to offer, Jason. And people here could really use someone like you." Her support gave me the push I needed. Over the next few weeks, I started laying the groundwork for my new practice. It wasn't flashy, and it didn't involve multi-million-dollar clients or corporate takeovers. Instead, I focused on helping locals with their legal needs, small business disputes, estate planning, and family law. It was fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated. The work was slower and more deliberate, but it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. And the best part? I was doing it on my own terms. One afternoon, as I sat in my modest office overlooking the town square, I received a letter from a familiar name. Emma. The envelope was simple, the handwriting unmistakable. For a moment, I considered leaving it unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page, written in her usual neat script. "Jason, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened between us. And I just wanted to say that I'm glad you found peace. I've started over too, in a new city, with a new job. It hasn't been easy, but I'm getting there. I wanted to apologize one more time, not because I expect anything from you, but because I needed you to know that I've changed. I've learned a lot about myself, and I realize now how much I hurt you. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I wish you nothing but happiness. Emma. I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. There were no lingering feelings of anger, no regrets. Just acceptance. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It was the final piece of a chapter that had long since ended. As I looked out the window, watching people go about their day, I realized that my life was no longer defined by the past. The road ahead was mine to create, and for the first time, I felt ready to embrace it, whatever it might bring. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over the town square. The quiet hum of life surrounded me, children playing, people walking their dogs, and the distant sound of laughter from a nearby cafe. Sitting in my office, I glanced out of the window, feeling a sense of calm settle over me. Life had come full circle, but in a way, I never could have predicted. It had been 6 months since I officially opened my small legal practice, and in that time, I had helped more people than I ever thought possible. Not in the way I used to, with corporate deals and courtroom victories, but in ways that felt more meaningful. Helping a local family secure their future, assisting small businesses with legal advice, or simply being there to offer guidance when someone needed it most. I had found my place in this world, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Claire had become an even bigger part of my life. Our connection had grown into something steady, something real. She brought light and laughter into my days, and together, we built a quiet but fulfilling life. There was no rush, no grand plans for the future. Just the simple joy of being with someone who understood me in ways I didn't think possible. One evening, as we sat together on her porch, watching the sun sink into the horizon, she looked over at me with a smile. "You seem happy," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "I am," I replied, wrapping my arm around her. "I really am." And it was true. After everything, the betrayal, the revenge, the anger, I had found happiness. It wasn't in the flashy life I had once pursued or the power I had sought in Miami. It was here, in the quiet moments, in the connections I had made, and in the peace I had found within myself. But as much as I had moved on, there were still reminders of the past. One evening, a few weeks after receiving Emma's letter, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened between us. The pain, the heartbreak, the decisions I had made in response to her betrayal. It all seemed like a lifetime ago, but in some ways, it still lingered in the background. I decided to reach out to her one last time. Not because I wanted anything from her, but because I needed to close that chapter completely. I wanted to thank her, not for the pain she caused, but for the lessons I had learned as a result. The message was simple: "Thank you, Emma. I hope you found what you were looking for. I know I have." I didn't expect a response, and I didn't need one. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me finally letting go of the last remnants of that old life, the one where I had let anger and revenge consume me. In the end, I learned that holding on to that kind of bitterness only kept me trapped in a cycle of pain. A few days later, I received a short reply: "I'm glad you found peace, Jason. I wish you all the best." And with that, the last door to my past closed. The person I had once been, the Jason who had fought for success, who had been betrayed, and who had sought revenge, was no longer a part of me. I was someone new, someone who had found happiness in the things that truly mattered. The future stretched out before me, wide open and full of possibilities. I didn't know where the road would take me next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready for whatever came, confident in the knowledge that I had built a life I could be proud of, a life free from the shadows of the past. As Claire and I sat on the porch, watching the last light of the day fade away, I realized that everything I had been through had led me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the decisions I had made, they were all part of the journey that had brought me here. And as I looked over at her, the woman who had shown me what it meant to truly live, I couldn't help but smile. Life, it seemed, had a way of working itself out. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace with who I was, where I had been, and where I was going. The past was behind me, the future was ahead, and for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be.